Welcome to People, Process, then HR Tech. I'm Sid. I work at Beekeeper. It's a frontline employee app for workers who don't sit behind a desk. It connects them to all the resources they need to do a great job. And the series is about putting people first, then process, then using technology to tie it all together. Today we are joined by Greer Prosich. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I realized I
Yes,
forgot to ask and I just went for it. So thanks so much
I'm
for joining
impressed.
us.
I'm impressed. No one ever
Yes.
gets it.
Uh,
That's fabulous.
yeah, I got my win for the day. So, yeah, thanks so much for joining. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role?
Yeah, so I'm Greer. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. I am a people process person through and through. I most recently was at a startup working on continuous feedback and have recently transitioned to an advisor with them. And now I'm focusing on really starting a conversation around disability in the workplace. So, what do accommodations look like? How can we create environments that are conducive to what people need? And creating space for them and all kinds of things to make sure, I live with a disability. So for me, it's something that's very close to my heart. So really focusing right now on how to create those inclusive workplaces.
And of course, you mentioned you deal with a disability, but what else kind of motivated you to step into this and create this project?
Yeah, so I run a free performance management community called the Performance Innovation Collective. It's all focused on rising the tide and the ships all together on performance management. So let's have conversations, let's share resources, let's move forward together. And so as we started planning for 2025, we got into a couple different work streams. And one of the work streams that came out of it was this reimagining disability, rethinking disability, because one of the other gals who's on the leadership team with me also lives with a disability and she sits on a podcast. And so we had a couple conversations and we're just like, let's do something about this. And so what we've come up with are a podcast that's going to focus on kind of the intersection of disability and performance. We're doing a spotlight series on individuals and the disabilities that they live with to really like bring some visibility and to put a face to a name so that people can start understanding like people live with disabilities in the workplace and this is what they need and how they need to be supported. And I'm an action person, I'm action oriented. And so for me, it's like, well, we can have all these conversations, but if we're not actually producing something and changing something, we might as well not be having the conversations. And so we're working towards putting together kind of like a hackathon. So, like a day long event of how are we having conversations and doing working sessions and sharing resources, doing scholarships, ensuring that people really are kind of having a sustainable conversation around disability in the workplace. And a lot of resources aren't out there. So, how can we make those really readily available?
That's so cool. And it sounds like it's not easy to do this, right? There's no foundation that's being built. So now you are kind of leading that way. So that's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely making it up as I go. I say that consistently. I don't know what I'm doing, but I am putting a steering committee in place to help me figure out what I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think that's been a huge learning for me is really like acknowledge where your blind spots are and pull people in who can help you fill those blind spots, who are knowledgeable and who have the experience that you might not.
Sure. And you mentioned you're an action oriented person. Where does that come from? Can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got here?
Yeah, probably the hospitality that worked in my background. So, starting at 15 years old, I was working at a sandwich shop, and it just was something that kind of really shaped who I was. So, again, I have a disability. I broke my back when I was 15, 16 years old, and because of that, I couldn't play sports anymore. And so, for me, I kind of threw myself into work. What does work look like? How can I dedicate myself to something different? And so, for me, it's working in hospitality was always just like, wearing 1,500 hats. You never know what's going to come for you. Every day is going to look different. And so being action oriented was definitely something that helped me be successful in restaurants because dealing with people who you don't see every day, you never know what you're going to get. And so you just have to be agile and flexible and you have to make decisions kind of on the fly in a lot of ways.
Sounds like some of the things you're saying are also skills you need in HR. Can you talk about that and how you went from hospitality to HR?
Yeah, yeah. Transferable skills, huge. Love a transferable skill, right? Like I think we talk a lot about what you can teach and what you can learn and what you can come with. And a lot of things that we're going to talk about are really innate and are teachable and are things that people can build and grow with. And so for me, it was really important to focus on how was I going to get to the next step? How was I going to get out of hospitality? Right. So a lot of people don't really give people in hospitality credit. I could have done it without a degree. So a lot of people fall into it. And so they don't understand those transferable skills. And so for me, I had to go back to school. I was having lots of conversations with people and I was not being taken seriously, unfortunately. People weren't understanding the fact that, I had worked at restaurants where I had built it from the ground up. I hired every single person that was working in that restaurant. I helped put the bar down, like lay it, glue it to the top of the actual restaurant where people were sitting and doing it. And so, when you actually think about what all of that looks like and how much money you're managing and schedules and personalities and all that different kind of stuff, it really is transferable for HR. And so, maybe I wasn't having these like really super formal career path conversations in restaurants. But what I was doing was working with bussers to say, hey, you can help me identify the processes that are going to help set you up for success. Let's create those, let's write them down, let's scale them, and make sure that all your other team members are trained on them. And so I think you can be really creative and you can still help people grow even when there isn't that defined career path. And so for me, I really was kind of thinking of like, all right, I manage a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people on a different daily basis. And so, how can I take what I do and pull it into tech? And so, that transition for me, yeah, I had to go back to school. So, I have my master's in industrial and organizational psychology. I felt like I'd always had bad bosses and I never felt like it was really their fault. And so, I wanted to go back and figure out how I can help managers be successful, give them the resources they need, and help remove barriers for them to be successful because I think we set up a lot of people for failure. And just like restaurants, I think we do the same thing in tech. So you've got a great bartender, a great host, and you go, great, you want to manage the restaurant? And then you give them no training, no support, no mentoring, and we wonder why they fail. It's kind of the same in tech. And so there's a lot of similar lessons that you can learn and things that you can apply industry to industry.
Absolutely. And you've taken that into a span of different HR positions and practices. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I've kind of run the gamut with HR. I like to say I've done everything besides benefits and recruiting, essentially. So for me, yeah, really it was like hiring, training, onboarding. Those are really, really key important times in a restaurant, right? And they're also, as we know, really important times in a company. And so we have to think about how can we take those different parallel paths and give them the resources that they need. So for me, thinking about onboarding and training and how can we get people to come in and be successful? What does success look like in a role? How are we setting expectations for somebody to know what path they want to take? Doesn't matter where you're at, doesn't matter what industry you're in. People need to know what success looks like. They need to know where they can make decisions. They need to know what autonomy that they have. And I think we don't do a very good job of setting people up with that. And so, really thinking about from my background is how can I empower individuals to be successful? So I've been that person who is, in the trenches, kind of running plates and doing dishes and all of that kind of stuff. And so I want to always create programs for the lowest common denominator because there's nobody who's more important than anybody else in an organization, if you ask me. And so I think we have to be realistic about what we're bringing into these organizations. And so coming from a hospitality background, it's really helped me understand how do I have to meet people where they're at? How can I, prop them up where they are and encourage them to take on more ownership or be successful? So there's so many different things that we can do if we just kind of open our mind a little bit and we're creative in the way that we do it.
Yeah, everything you said makes sense, but I'm curious, what are some of the fails you've seen or the mistakes along the journey where you're like, wow, this is what was happening before? I know you had talked about when we had spoke before is like for the field, by the field, which I think really captures a lot of your mindset. But yeah, I'm curious what you've seen that was just like wrong.
Yeah. So great segue. It's almost like you're hosting a podcast, like you know what you're doing. um, but yeah, so I was working for a company and it was a large company. It was national. There were about 14,000 people at this company. And so, again, digging into my hospitality background, I know people don't just want things to come down from HR. right? Like we have to be intentional about how we're including people in the conversation and getting to the root of what they need and ensuring that the training is applicable and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was in a role where I was putting together a couple different programs and I was really proud of it. I was really, really proud of the program. And then we went to the executive team. I was in front of the CEO. I was presenting it to him, and the CEO stopped and said, "This is great, but like, what is this? What are we doing? How did we get here?" And I had to stop myself and go, oh no, I did this wrong. I didn't include the right people. I didn't include, people in the conversation when it was important and didn't get the input or like what do success metrics look like for different people across the organization. And so with that, I kind of took a step back and started thinking, how are we actually empowering people to be part of this? So that's where this for the field, by the field premise came up. So again, I don't really want HR to tell me what to do, but if my peers are part of the planning process or if they've created a program and can help launch it and really be the catalysts of it, I'm keen on that. And so in this process, what we did was really identify those key people in the field who had the influence, who had the experience, who had the expertise, right? So maybe not somebody who was that most senior level person, but somebody who had been there for a while and they had a lot of cultural tacit knowledge, or somebody who worked overtime every week. So they were there constantly. So we put together this kind of committee of people to help us define what these programs looked like. So they helped us put it together. They helped us define the training. They helped us deliver all of it. And then when it came down to actually communicating this out, we launched it from for the field, by the field. So it wasn't launched from the HR team, it was launched from these people's peers. And so it was something that hit the ground running because it wasn't coming from me. It wasn't coming from this nebulous HR kind of entity in the sky. It was coming from people's peers. And I haven't been there for a very long time. And as far as I know, the practices that came out of that program are still in place at that company today because we empowered people to be part of the process.
And it sounds like some of these are kind of laying the foundations, the bricks for the Performance Innovation Collective. So, yeah, how did this all lead to you creating and starting that?
Yeah. So while I was working at the startup at Flint, I kind of didn't have a community, if I'm being really honest with you. I think performance management is something that hasn't really evolved with HR in a lot of ways. I think it's ill defined in a lot of organizations. And so for me, I really wanted to find my community. I wanted to figure out. I have ideas, I have thoughts, I have questions, but I don't really have anybody to talk to about this. And so kind of just pulled out a call to action on LinkedIn and had a couple hundred people say they wanted to be part of it. And so we just kind of assembled a leadership team and made it happen. And so we're doing lots of learning sessions, lots of roundtables, really just lots of conversations for anybody who wants to change performance management in their organization. We're building in the open. We're having conversations in the open. You don't have to pay anything. And we're trying to partner with as many other organizations that are doing the work as possible. So, Fearless PX, they are the podcast that we're partnering with. They have lots of conversations around the elephant in the org, which is a lot of fun. We're partnering with Invisible Condition to bring visibility to, things that you can't see. Again, I live with a disability and you probably would never know that. So, working with different organizations as well that are doing the work. And as far as the hackathon goes, so this is something that's come out of the Performance Innovation Collective in terms of the disability, is really like, how are we going to empower people to be part of the conversation and to ensure that disability in their workplace is something that is accessible and people do know how to talk about and people have a common language for. And so it's kind of morphed into, well, how can we talk about performance? But how can we talk about performance in a way where, like, there is a demographic of people that aren't really supported in what they need? And to be very frank, a lot of people don't care about it until it comes to their doorstep. And it's not, if you're going to become disabled, it's a matter of time. We all will become disabled, whether it's temporary or not, at some point in our lives. And so I really wanted to create a safe space for people to have these conversations and to show up in ways that they feel safe.
It's so cool. I think there's a lot that can be done here. I'm really curious where you think we stand when it comes to disability awareness because, I think you could see it both ways. One is the stigma is breaking down and more people are putting their voices out thanks to people like you. But The other, at least for me, I was like, it's hard to find leaders or other people who are speaking about this publicly, or if there's programs in place. So, yeah, I'm curious where you think we stand and what the future looks like there.
Yeah, I think there's a huge stigma. There's no other way to say it. There's just an enormous stigma around disability. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around disability. When I say to you, think of disability, you think of someone in a wheelchair. You think of someone with a walking aid. You think of someone who visibly shows up as disabled. And I think that that's important, but I don't think that's the whole picture. And so we've got to create spaces for these conversations to happen. I think that it's up to us to continue the conversation in an accessible way, right? So let's be flexible, let's be agile, let's not just throw the swords down and give up, but let's beat them at their own game and say, all right, fine, if you don't want us to say the word disability at work, we won't. We will come up with a different way to talk about it. We'll come up with a different way to have these conversations and to provide resources and to do research and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think the future is bright. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be a really intentional thing that we have to keep our head down and keep moving. I think there's going to be a lot of community that is required for this to actually change. And I think we're going to probably have a lot of disappointments along the way, to be very, very frank. But part of what we have to do is start the conversation. And so it's my hope here is let's at least just give people language. Let's give people a safe space to feel themselves being seen. Because once people start to go and feel visible, then that's where they feel a bit more empowered to make changes. So I can say, since starting the Spotlight series, since starting all of these different elements of this work stream, I have people reach out to me every single day saying that they feel seen, that they're glad that we're doing this work, that they can't believe that this is actually happening now. And so this work is necessary. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And so I think we have to be resilient. And I think that just like anything else in business, we have to be strategic. We have to be intentional. We have to really think about how are we going to push this conversation forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes those people end up reaching out and then asking you to join their video series. So,
Yeah, exactly, right? I think that's the biggest thing here is like community can happen anywhere. You never know who you're going to talk to. You again, you look at me and you don't think I have a disability. And so we have to allow people, if you're going to tell me that I have to bring my whole self to work, I want you to give me the space to do so. It has to be safe. And so I can't be expected to hide this element of who I am because it affects me every single day of my life. And if you don't recognize that, you're not creating the safe space for me. I can't show up authentically. We know that all of this impacts productivity and happiness and all of this kind of stuff. And so let's make space. Let's start the conversation. Let's give people a platform. And it's not about me, it's about creating this movement for everybody who doesn't feel seen right now.
yeah, and I'm just imagining, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a hospitality worker. I've been one myself and I see others. And when you say whole self to work, they almost have to bring their whole self to work. I mean, they can be hiding whatever's invisible, but they have to show up. Whereas a lot of tech workers are now remote. Yeah, I'm curious if you can comment on that. Like, they really don't have a choice. So, this is even potentially more important to help the hospitality and the frontline workers who need this awareness.
Yeah, I agree. I think you threw me back to a memory that I had as I was a manager at one point in time, and I was young. Shouldn't have been a manager. We'll just put that out there. My frontal lobe had not developed all the way yet, so I had no business managing adults. However, I will remember there was an individual who was working a server. They'd been there forever, and they had lupus. I didn't know what it was, how it manifested, anything like that. But I'll never forget a day standing in the kitchen and they were sobbing. They couldn't work. They were in pain. They couldn't think. They just needed to go home. And I did not understand it. And I was just like, you look fine. Like, what's wrong? Like, you look absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And I remember sending them home. And then all of a sudden that puts the stress on everybody else because now you're short staffed and you can't just pull somebody out of thin air to serve a table, right? So it was a really big learning experience for me because then I had to go to my lead and say, all right, I sent them home. What I was thinking, then they weren't on board with it. They didn't understand why I'd sent this person home or how it had manifested or how it impacted. And so I think from, a disability perspective, as somebody who I wasn't diagnosed with a disability for almost 2 decades. And so I definitely had symptoms. I definitely was somebody who, like, I would have to go in the back in the middle of a shift and sit down. I would have to completely get off my feet, or I'd have to my pain is in my lower back, and so a lot of times I just have to like bend over to stretch it out. So at any point in time, you'd see me keeled over in the back, just kind of stretching my back out. And so having this individual with lupus really kind of made me change how I was thinking about things, and how are we supporting people to show up, and how are we giving them the space that they need, because this person then, as you can imagine, want to come back the next day. It was a few day thing. And so what I was able to do then was say, you go home, I'll get all your shifts covered. I will work with you to ensure that you have the resources that you need. We sent food to their house to make sure that they weren't having to take care of themselves in that time. And so, for people who have to be retail workers on the floor, it's hard. And I don't have a lot of answers, right? Like, I think that's the hard part. And we have to acknowledge that. And that's why this work is so important, because we have to find different ways for people to be able to show up, even if they aren't feeling well. We have to be able to accommodate people to be able to make a living, but to also be able to say, I can't show up today. And so I don't have an answer, but I think that that is part of the reason of why we're doing this work is how can we create these conversations and say, well, maybe this person couldn't show up and stand up all day and serve tables, but maybe what we could have done was accommodate them to answer the phones so that they were still on payroll, right? Because once you start to lapse on hours, then you miss insurance. And then, as you can imagine, with someone with a disability, how important insurance is, and then how that, when you don't have it, the stress and what stress can do for a flare, right? So we just have to be creative. We have to be creative in any other way that we are in business. Disability is no different.
And to your point earlier about being business oriented as well, that can hurt the business, right? You have more absenteeism, higher workers' comp premiums, things like that. So I'd like to think that HR leaders are are going to be at the forefront of this change, especially from a company standpoint. How do they get the buy-in from leadership, from executives to invest in these types of programming?
Yeah, I think it's a really hard position that a lot of HR people are in, and that's something to acknowledge first, right? We are I can speak firsthand and say I've had so many people tell me they can do my job because they have been a manager, or they've had to deliver a performance review, or whatever that is. But at the end of the day, there's a science to evaluations if you do it the right way. And so I think we've got to be better at bringing people along with us. We've got to empower people to be part of the conversation. I think that, again, the stigma exists. And so we have to be having these conversations in public and sharing firsthand accounts of what people are going through, and bring it up and say, this is what I need in the workplace, right? I think in a lot of ways, I go to senior level meetings and I talk about spoons. I say, I only have I have 4 spoons today. I don't have an infinite amount of spoons. Can you help me prioritize what's most important to take care of today? Right. And as a senior leader, when you model that behavior, that's important. And so I think it's free to model behavior. So as an HR person, I can model to senior leader what I need, and then I can empower them to do the same with their team members. I think that we can do a lot better with just creating culture around disability. So for me, I'm someone who's worked in onboarding and orientation forever, it feels like. And so if something is important to a company, what do? You communicate it in onboarding. So do something as simple as communicating your accessibility and inclusion policy, or how it works internally, or what resources are available for somebody. We don't have to do these huge sweeping initiatives where there's a department for disability internally. It should be built into the fabric of our culture. And so that's how we talk to people. It's the language that we use. It's how we show up when people need support and say, hey, I can't show up today. Okay, I need to take the day off. Or I only have a couple of spoons. That's where the rubber meets the road. It's not in the, like, let's get up and talk about this in an all hands, because that's just lip service. It's the, well, let's build the policies, or let's empower the managers to be able to have conversations about accommodations with their team members and understand what accommodations look like, so that they don't have to escalate it and they can just support them right then and there. So there's a lot of things that we can be doing as HR to change the conversation for free, to change the conversation without a lot of lift and to hold people accountable to this kind of stuff too, right? So I think that's the other biggest piece is there's no accountability in disability or accessibility in a lot of ways. And so create some checks and balances, create some metrics for success. Like we're not reporting this stuff to CEOs and C-suite in a way that they care. Why aren't we talking their language? Like they're not talking our language and it frustrates us. So why are we not understanding that they're frustrated when we're not talking their language either? So I think there's a lot of us versus them mentality happening, and we need to be better about like us all together coming together. And we can do that, but we have to be intentional about it and how we talk about it.
I'm just really excited to share this episode because I think there's so
Yeah.
much practical information in here that I think will really resonate with the audience. And I just really love that. Yeah, we're not talking hypotheticals, we're talking about things that people can do tomorrow. And
Yeah.
it's not just about HR, it's about the business overall. So I really appreciate that. Very refreshing.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Thanks so much, Greer. I'm curious, how can people learn more about you and what you're doing at the Performance Innovation Collective?
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. I'm a serial LinkedIner, but I'm posting consistently also about the disability hackathon and the initiatives that we have moving forward. I'm posting consistently twice a week our spotlight series, so lots to follow along with there. And then in terms of the disability hackathon and the podcast, follow the Fearless PX, follow Invisible Condition. We're doing all sorts of stuff that's coming. So in the next few months, we'll be announcing more. If there are people who are listening to this who want to be involved, connect with me. I'm here. We definitely want as many people as possible to be part of this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. And I can attest that she will respond in the DM. So
I
reach
will.
out.
Yes, yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah,
Until
thanks
next
for
time.
having me.